Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into one of the darkest chapters in human history. A world where the air feels heavy, the streets grow quieter each day, and something unseen is spreading faster than anyone can understand. We're diving into what life was really like during the time of the Black Death. Forget the idea of distant history that feels calm and controlled. The truth, you probably wouldn't survive a single day without knowing exactly what to do, and even then, it might not be enough. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you actually enjoy this. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft, ambient background hum, and let's step into a very different kind of street. Imagine narrow alleys, doors shut tight, distant coughing echoing through the air, and the uneasy silence where crowds used to be. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a medieval town at the height of the plague. The good news? You're still breathing. The bad news? Something invisible is already moving through the city, and it doesn't care who you are. Life here is tense, uncertain, and filled with dangers you can't even see. People avoid each other. Families stay locked inside. And every passing day brings new rumors, new fear, and fewer familiar faces. Tonight starts like any other night, or at least it feels that way at first, but the moment you wake up you can tell something isn't right. It's not dramatic or sudden, nothing like the movies, just a quiet, uncomfortable feeling sitting in your body that you can't really explain. Your head feels heavy, like you barely slept, and your body is warmer than it should be. Not in a nice way either, more like you left yourself wrapped in blankets for too long, and now you regret it. You sit up slowly, blinking, trying to shake it off, telling yourself it's probably nothing serious, just one of those mornings where you feel a bit off for no reason. You try to ignore it, because that's the easiest thing to do. You tell yourself it's just bad sleep, or maybe a small cold starting, something normal that people deal with all the time. It's not like you've never felt sick before, so why would this be any different? You swing your legs off the bed and stand up, but the second you do, the room shifts slightly, not enough to make you fall or panic, just enough to make you stop and think for a second. You mutter to yourself something like, "Okay, that's new," and then you keep moving because standing still makes it feel worse. You walk it off, step by step, convincing yourself your body just needs a minute to catch up. The floor feels colder than usual under your feet as you move, and the air feels strange too. Not fresh, not dirty, just heavy, like something invisible is sitting in it. You splash some water on your face, hoping that wakes you up properly. And for a moment it almost works. You feel a bit clearer, a bit more normal, but that feeling doesn't last long. There's still something off, something you can't quite fix no matter what you do. Then you step outside, and that's when things really start to feel wrong. Mornings are usually loud, that's just how it is. People shouting, merchants setting up their stalls, carts rolling over stone, dogs barking at nothing, someone arguing about prices like it's the most important thing in the world. It's messy and noisy and alive. That's what normal feels like. But today it's quieter, not completely silent, just quieter than it should be. And you notice it straight away without even trying. You look around as you start walking, and it doesn't take long to realize people aren't acting normal either. There's still some people outside, but no one is talking the way they usually do. No one is laughing. No one is yelling. Everyone seems distracted, like they're all thinking about the same thing, but no one wants to say it out loud. You try to act normal yourself, like nothing's wrong, but the more you look, the more things don't add up. A shop that should be open is closed, another one too, and there's a car just sitting in the street with no one near it, like it was abandoned halfway through something. You pass a small group of people standing close together, and they're whispering, properly whispering like they don't want anyone else to hear. So you slow down just a little bit, not enough to be obvious, just enough to catch a few words. You hear things like sick and came out of nowhere, and yesterday he was fine, and That's enough to make your mind start paying attention. That doesn't sound like a normal cold anymore. That sounds like something worse, something fast. You keep walking, but now you're listening more carefully. And a few steps later, you hear another group talking the same way. Same quiet voices, same nervous tone. You catch words like they say it spreads, and no one knows where it came from. And that word spread sticks in your head more than anything else. Now you're fully awake whether you like it or not, because a sickness that spreads quickly is not something you can just ignore. You try to stay calm, but it's getting harder. Your body still feels off. That warmth hasn't gone away. If anything, it's getting slightly worse, and now your thoughts are starting to race a bit. You pull your clothes tighter around you like that's going to help somehow, even though you know it probably won't. Up ahead, you see a door slam shut suddenly. Not gently, not casually, but fast and hard from the inside, like whoever's in there really doesn't want anything getting in or out. And that makes you slow down again. At this point, it's obvious something is wrong. Not just with you, but with everything around you. The whole place feels different, like the city itself knows something bad is happening, but hasn't said it out loud yet. You turn a corner and see more people gathered in small groups. Not crowds, just scattered clusters of people talking quietly. No one making eye contact for long, like everyone is trying to avoid each other without making it obvious. That's when you hear the word that makes everything feel worse. Someone says curse, not even whispering it, just saying it like it's the only explanation they have left. You glance over and see an older man shaking his head, telling someone that this doesn't just happen, that it has to be something unnatural, and the other person just nods because they don't have a better answer. Hearing that doesn't help at all. If anything, it makes your chest feel tighter, because a curse isn't something you can fight or understand. You keep moving, but now your mind is racing properly, putting everything together, people getting sick suddenly, things spreading, shops closing, doors shutting, and now talk of curses on top of it all. This is not normal in any way, and pretending it is doesn't work anymore. Your breathing feels a bit different now. Not painful, just tense, like your body knows something is wrong before your brain fully catches up. You pass another street, and it's even quieter than the last, almost too quiet, and as you walk past a slightly open window, you hear coughing from inside, deep and rough, the kind of cough that makes you uncomfortable just hearing it. You don't stop, you don't even look for too long. You just keep moving because stopping feels like a bad idea. Now you're walking faster, not running, just moving with purpose, trying to find something that feels normal, something that makes sense, but nothing does. Everywhere you look, there are small signs that something is off. People avoiding each other, conversations cutting off when someone walks past, that constant uneasy feeling sitting in the air like it's part of the environment now. And then it really hits you. This isn't just a bad morning or a small sickness going around. This feels like the start of something much bigger, something no one understands yet. You stop for a second and actually think about it properly. You feel sick. The town feels wrong. People are scared, and no one has real answers. Just guesses and rumors and words like curse and spreads being thrown around like that explains anything. But it doesn't explain anything. It just makes it worse, because if no one understands what's happening, then no one knows how to stop it either. A light breeze moves through the street, but it doesn't feel refreshing. It just carries that same heavy feeling with it, like the air itself is part of the problem now. You look around one more time, taking it all in, the quiet streets, the nervous people, the strange atmosphere, and you realize this moment right here is the first real sign that something is very, very wrong. And the worst part is that this is only the beginning. At first, no one really knows where it came from. And that's what makes it worse, because when something has no clear beginning, it feels impossible to control. People start pointing fingers in every direction, blaming travelers, merchants, strangers, even their own neighbors. But one story keeps coming up more than the others. Ships, the kind that arrive loaded with goods, spices, fabrics, all the things people rely on. But this time they didn't just bring trade, they brought something else with them, something no one could see. You hear about it in bits and pieces as the day goes on. whispers spreading faster than the sickness itself. A ship docked not too long ago, and something wasn't right about it. Some say the crew were already sick when it arrived. Others say they looked fine at first, but then suddenly dropped within days. Either way, it doesn't matter now, because whatever came with that ship didn't stay there. It moved, quietly, slipping into the city without anyone noticing until it was already too late. And the thing is, it didn't spread the way people expected. It wasn't just coughing or being near someone sick, at least not in the way they understood. It moved through the smallest, most overlooked parts of life. Rats, the ones no one ever thinks about because they're always around, running through streets, hiding in walls, climbing over everything. They carried fleas, and those fleas carried the disease, passing it from one body to another without a sound, without a warning. No one saw it happening. No one felt in the moment. And that's what made it so dangerous. You probably wouldn't even notice it yourself. A tiny bite, something so small you'd ignore completely. Just another irritation in a world full of them. You wouldn't think twice about it. Wouldn't connect it to anything serious. But that's how it starts. Not with something obvious, but with something so small it feels meaningless. Meanwhile, the city keeps trying to function like normal, at least at first. Merchants still try to sell what they can. People still go about their routines, but there's a shift now. Something subtle but growing. More people are talking about sickness. More doors are staying closed. More faces look tired and uneasy. And still, no one really understands what's going on. The authorities, the people who are supposed to have answers, don't have any. They try to respond, but everything they do feels uncertain, like they're guessing more than they're actually helping. Some blame bad air, others blame sin or divine punishment, and a few just hope it passes on its own. There's no clear plan, no real understanding, just scattered attempts to deal with something far bigger than they realize. You might hear about officials inspecting certain areas, or trying to isolate a few cases, but it's inconsistent, and it's already too late for small actions to matter. The disease isn't contained, it's moving, and it's moving faster than anyone can track. Every day, there are more people getting sick, more families dealing with it behind closed doors, more whispers spreading through the streets. At first, the numbers are small enough that people try to ignore them, convincing themselves it's just a rough patch, something that will pass. But then it doesn't pass. It grows. One person turns into a few turn into dozens, and suddenly it feels like everywhere you look someone is either sick or knows someone who is. You start noticing it more clearly now. A neighbor you saw yesterday isn't outside today. A shop that was open this morning is closed by afternoon. Someone mentions a family down the street that all fell ill at once. The stories start stacking up, one after another, until it's impossible to dismiss them as coincidence. And through all of this, the scariest part is how quiet the cause remains. There's no visible enemy, nothing to point at, nothing to fight. It's in the air, in the streets, in the spaces between people, moving without being seen. You can't avoid it because you don't even know where it is. Your own body still doesn't feel right either, and now that thought lingers in the back of your mind more than before. Earlier, it was easy to ignore just a small discomfort, but now it feels connected to something bigger, something spreading through the entire city at the same time. People start changing their behavior, even if they don't fully understand why. They keep their distance more, avoid crowded areas, speak in lower voices like saying things too loudly might somehow make it worse. There's tension everywhere, building slowly but steadily, like the city is holding its breath. And the cases keep rising. That's the part no one can ignore anymore. It's not just a few isolated incidents. It's happening again and again, faster each day. More homes affected, more people disappearing from the streets, more signs that whatever this is, it's not slowing down. You begin to realize that this isn't something that came and went quietly. This is something that arrived, and is now taking hold, settling into the city like it belongs there. It came with ships, with travelers, with things people welcomed without a second thought, and now it's everywhere. The worst part is that no one stopped it when they had the chance, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't even know it was there. By the time people started noticing, it had already spread too far, moved through too many places, touched too many lives. Now you're standing in the middle of it, feeling that same heavy air, watching the same uneasy streets, and understanding something that no one wants to say out loud. This isn't the beginning anymore. The plague has already arrived, and it's not leaving anytime soon. At first, you try to convince yourself it's nothing serious, just a rough morning that never really went away. But as time passes, your body starts making it very clear that this isn't normal. The headache comes first, not sharp but constant, sitting behind your eyes like pressure that won't leave no matter what you do, making everything feel slower and heavier, like even thinking takes more effort than it should. No matter how much you rest, it doesn't fade. It just stays there, quietly getting worse. Then come the chills, which don't make any sense because your body is already warm, almost too warm, yet somehow you feel cold at the same time. It's that uncomfortable mix where you don't know if you need a blanket or fresh air. So you just sit there stuck in between, shivering one moment and sweating the next. Your hands feel weak, your legs feel heavier than usual, and even simple things like standing or walking start to feel like more effort than they should. Like your energy is slowly being drained without you noticing exactly when it started. You try to push through it, telling yourself people get sick all the time and that this will pass like anything else, but your body isn't listening anymore. The weakness spreads gradually, not all at once, just enough to make everything harder, like something is slowly taking over piece by piece. Even lifting your arms feels slightly off, like they're not fully yours, and you find yourself sitting down more often without really thinking about it. Then you notice something else, something that actually makes you stop and pay attention. There's a dull pain in your neck at first, easy to ignore. Maybe you slept wrong or strained something, but it doesn't stay dull for long. It gets worse, more focused, more noticeable, and when you finally reach up to touch it, you feel it clearly. A swelling. It's small, but it shouldn't be there at all. And when you press it gently, you immediately regret it because of how much it hurts. Not like a bruise or a muscle ache, but deeper, sharper, like something inside is seriously wrong. You check again just to make sure you're not imagining it, but it's still there, solid and painful. And then you start wondering if it's just your neck. You shift slightly, now more aware of your body than before, and that's when you feel it again somewhere else. Under your arm, another swelling, same pain, same wrong feeling. You don't even want to check properly, but you already know it's there, and the realization alone makes your chest feel tighter. Now it's not just a headache or a fever anymore. Now it's something physical, something visible, something you can't ignore. These swellings, these painful lumps, feel completely unnatural, and the more you think about it, the worse it gets, because you've never experienced anything like this before. Your fever begins to climb higher without warning. Your skin feels hotter, your breathing feels heavier, not exactly difficult, but more effort than it should be, and sweat forms even though you still feel cold underneath it all. You try to stand again, maybe to get help, or just move somewhere more comfortable, but your balance isn't steady anymore. The world feels slightly off, not spinning wildly, just enough to make every step feel uncertain, and you grab on something nearby to steady yourself. For a moment you just stay there, trying to process what's happening, but the conclusion is already forming whether you want it or not. This isn't a cold, not even close. The pain, the swellings, the way your body is reacting, none of it matches anything normal or familiar. This isn't something you can just sleep off or ignore until tomorrow, and your mind starts going back to everything you heard earlier, the whispers about sickness spreading, people getting worse quickly, and now all of it feels a lot more real than it did before. Because now it's happening to you. You think about the people you saw earlier, the ones whispering, the ones avoiding each other, the doors shutting quickly, the fear in their voices, and suddenly it all connects in a way you really wish it didn't. This is what they were talking about. This is what's been moving through the city, and now it's not just around you, it's inside you. The realization creeps in slowly, but once it's there you can't ignore it anymore. Your body feels worse with every passing moment, the fever rising, the pain spreading, the weakness getting harder to push through, and those swellings are impossible to forget. You try to stay calm, but it's getting harder because deep down you know this isn't something small or harmless. This is something serious, something dangerous. You've seen enough already to understand that people aren't just getting sick and recovering. They're getting worse, and they're getting worse fast. Your breathing grows heavier again. Your head pounds harder, and your body doesn't feel like your own anymore. Everything is slower, heavier, more difficult, like whatever this is, it's taking control piece by piece. You sit down again because standing feels like too much, and for a moment you just focus on breathing, trying to stay steady, but the truth is already there in the back of your mind whether you want it or not. This isn't normal illness, and whatever has been spreading through the city, whatever has been moving quietly from person to person, it hasn't just reached you, it has taken hold, and there's no easy way out of it now. At first, the fear stays quiet, sitting in the background like something people don't want to admit is real, but it doesn't stay like that for long. Once more people start getting sick, once the signs become impossible to ignore, everything shifts fast. The whispers turn into open panic, and the city that once felt busy and alive starts to feel unstable, like it's about to fall apart at any moment. People begin leaving, not slowly or in an organized way, but all at once, like everyone had the same idea at the same time. You see families packing whatever they can carry, not caring about what they leave behind, just focused on getting out. Carts overloaded, people rushing, arguments breaking out over space, over supplies, over anything. Some don't even have a plan, they just want distance, as if moving far enough away will somehow keep them safe from something they don't even understand. The streets that were already quieter now feel chaotic in a different way. Not loud and lively, but tense and desperate. Movement is everywhere, but it's not normal movement. It's rushed, uneven, unpredictable. People bump into each other, barely apologizing, eyes constantly scanning, like everyone is trying to avoid everyone else while also trying to escape at the same time. There's no sense of order anymore, just urgency. Markets start shutting down, one by one at first, then all at once. Stalls that were once full of food and goods sit empty or abandoned. Some half-packed like the owners just gave up halfway through. No one wants to stay in one place too long, especially not somewhere crowded. The idea of being surrounded by others, once completely normal, now feels dangerous. What used to be the center of daily life turns into something people avoid completely. With the markets gone, everything else starts to fall apart too. Supplies become harder to find, food becomes uncertain, and people begin taking whatever they can get without asking. You start seeing things you wouldn't normally see, small acts at first, someone grabbing more than they should, someone pushing past others without caring. But it grows quickly. When people are scared enough, rules stop mattering. And then there's the part no one wants to talk about, but everyone notices. Families start breaking in ways you wouldn't expect. At first, people try to care for the sick, staying close, doing what they can. But as the illness gets worse and spreads faster, fear takes over. You hear stories, quiet first, then more common, about people being left behind. A sick relative shut in a room, a door closed, and no one coming back. Not because they don't care, but because they're terrified. You might even see it yourself. A house that should be full suddenly feels empty except for faint sounds inside, or maybe nothing at all. People avoid those places, walking past faster, not looking too closely. It's easier that way, easier than facing what's actually happening. The sense of community that once held everything together starts to disappear. Neighbors stop helping each other, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Everyone is focused on themselves, on staying alive, on avoiding anything that might bring them closer to the sickness. Trust fades quickly when every person could be a risk. At the same time, the people in charge don't seem to have control anymore. Whatever rules existed before start to feel weaker, less enforced, almost meaningless. You might hear orders being given, attempts to control movement or manage the situation, but they don't last. People don't listen the same way they used to, because fear is louder than authority now. You start noticing things slipping, small at first but growing. Disputes turn into fights more easily. Arguments don't get resolved, and there's no one stepping in to fix things. The structure that kept everything running smoothly begins to crack, and once those cracks appear, they spread fast. Walking through the streets now feels completely different from before. There's no sense of safety, no predictability, just a constant tension that follows you everywhere. You don't know what's going to happen next, who you might run into, or what condition they might be in. Every interaction feels risky. Every decision feels heavier. And all of this is happening while your own body still feels worse with every passing moment. The noise, the movement, the panic around you. It all feels overwhelming, harder to process when you're already struggling just to stay steady. You're not just watching the city fall apart. You're trying to move through it while your own strength is slipping away. You realize quickly that this isn't just a sickness anymore. It's something that's changing everything at once. It's not only affecting people's bodies, it's affecting how they think, how they act, how they treat each other. The normal rules of life don't apply anymore, and nothing feels stable. The worst part is how fast it all happened. Just days ago things were normal, or at least close to it, and now everything feels completely different. The city you woke up in is still the same place, the same streets, the same buildings, but it doesn't feel like it belongs to the same world anymore. Panic has taken over, and once it starts spreading, it moves almost as fast as the disease itself. There's no stopping it, no controlling it, just watching it grow as more people give in to fear, and everything that held society together begins to fall apart piece by piece. At some point, when fear isn't enough and people start demanding answers, attention turns to the only ones who are supposed to have them, the doctors. You'd expect confidence, maybe even a plan, something that makes you feel like this situation can be controlled, but what you actually get is uncertainty dressed up as authority. They arrive with their tools, their knowledge, their routines, and for a moment you almost feel relieved, like finally someone's going to fix this. But that feeling doesn't last very long. The treatments they use don't look reassuring, and they definitely don't feel reassuring. One of the most common is bloodletting, which sounds exactly like what it is, cutting into the body to let blood out, as if that will somehow balance whatever is going wrong inside you. You might sit there already weak, already struggling, and now someone is telling you that losing blood is going to help. It doesn't feel right, but when you're desperate, you don't exactly argue. So it happens, and instead of feeling better, you just feel more drained, more exhausted, like whatever strength you had left is slipping away even faster. Then there are the herbs and mixtures, strange combinations that are supposed to cleanse or protect or heal, depending on who you ask. Some are burned to create smoke, others are turned into drinks that taste as bad as you'd expect, and a few are rubbed onto the skin in ways that don't really make sense. People cling to these remedies because they need something to believe in, something to fight back with, even if deep down it's not doing much at all. You might try them yourself, hoping for even the smallest improvement, but nothing really changes. And then you see them, the figures that almost feel unreal at first, the so-called plague doctors. They stand out immediately, dressed in long dark robes with those strange beaked masks that make them look more like something out of a nightmare than someone who's supposed to help. The beak is often filled with herbs or perfumes, meant to block out what they believe is bad air, because that's what many think is causing all of this, something in the air itself that's poisoning people. When you first see one, it's hard not to stare. They move through the streets slowly, deliberately, carrying themselves like they understand something others don't. But the truth is they're just as uncertain as everyone else. The mask, the outfit, it's all protection, but not in the way you'd hope. It's not protecting you, it's protecting them, or at least trying to, because even they don't really know what they're dealing with. The problem is, no one understands the real cause of what's happening. There's no concept of bacteria, no understanding of how infection actually spreads through tiny invisible organisms, no idea that hygiene plays a huge role in all of this. People focus on smells, on air, on spiritual explanations, anything that seems to make sense in a world without the knowledge to explain it properly. So the solutions they come up with are based on guesses, traditions, and fear more than anything else. You start to notice that the treatments don't just fail to help, they often make things worse. Bloodletting weakens people who are already struggling. Some remedies irritate the body instead of calming it. Close contact with others during treatment can spread the illness even further without anyone realizing it. What's meant to be help turns into something that speeds up the problem instead of solving it. Watching it happen is frustrating in a way that's hard to describe, because you can see the effort, you can see people trying, but none of it is working. If anything, the more they try, the clearer it becomes that they're fighting something they don't understand at all. There's no clear progress, no moment where things start improving, just a slow, steady worsening that no treatment seems to stop. For you, it becomes even more personal. As your symptoms get worse, you're faced with the choice of whether to trust these methods or not. But what other option do you really have? Doing nothing feels just as dangerous, so you go along with it, hoping that maybe, somehow, something will work. But each attempt leaves you feeling weaker, more tired, more aware that this isn't going the way it should. Even the presence of doctors, which should bring comfort, starts to feel unsettling. When you see them now, it doesn't feel like help is arriving. It feels like confirmation that things are serious, that this isn't under control, that whatever is happening is beyond what they can handle. The beaked masks, the robes, the strange treatments, it all adds to the sense that this situation is far from normal. You realize that knowledge has limits, and right now those limits are being reached. Everything people rely on to stay healthy, all the usual ways of dealing with sickness, they just don't apply here. This isn't something familiar, it's something new, something overwhelming, and the people trying to stop it are just as lost as the people suffering from it. In the end, the scariest part isn't just the illness itself, it's the fact that the people who are supposed to fight it don't know how. They're trying everything they can think of, but none of it is enough, and some of it is making things worse. You're left in a situation where help exists, but it doesn't really help, and that's a feeling that's almost worse than having no help at all. At a certain point, when medicine fails and fear takes over, people start looking for answers somewhere else entirely. If no one can explain what's happening physically, then maybe it has a spiritual cause instead. That's the shift that begins to spread through the city, slowly at first, then all at once, like people finally agreeing on something, because they're out of options rather than because it actually makes sense. You start seeing it everywhere. People stopping in the streets to pray, not quickly or casually, but fully, like their lives depend on it. Others gather in groups, repeating prayers over and over, hoping that if enough voices speak at once, someone or something will listen. There's a feeling that maybe this isn't just illness, maybe it's punishment, like the city itself has done something wrong and is now paying for it. That idea spreads fast because it's simple, and when everything feels out of control, simple answers are comforting. If it's punishment, then there's a reason. If there's a reason, maybe there's a way to fix it. So people start talking about repentance, about sin, about needing to be forgiven. You hear conversations that sound less like medical concern and more like moral panic, as if the sickness is something the city brought on itself. Then things get more extreme. Public rituals begin to appear, people gathering in open spaces, sometimes in organized groups, sometimes just following whoever seems confident enough to lead them. Some begin acts of flagellation, whipping themselves in public, believing that suffering will somehow cleanse them or prove their devotion. It's intense to watch, not because it's violent in the usual sense, but because of how serious everyone is. Like pain itself has become a form of communication with something higher. You don't need to see much of it to understand the mindset behind it. When nothing else works, when doctors fail and fear spreads and death keeps coming closer, people start to believe that maybe the answer isn't in the body at all, but beyond it. So they try to prove themselves, to show they're worthy of being spared, or at least noticed. At the same time, churches become the center of everything. Not just places of worship anymore, but places people run to when they don't know where else to go. They fill up quickly, constantly, overflowing with people seeking comfort, answers, or just somewhere to be close to others who are still alive. The air inside becomes heavy in a different way now. Not just fear, but grief, exhaustion, desperation. Clergy try to keep up, delivering sermons, hearing confessions, offering guidance, but the scale is too much. There are too many people, too many questions, too many dying. The system was never built for something like this. Services that once felt structured and calm turn into crowded, overwhelming scenes where hope and suffering exist side by side in a way that's hard to process. And then there are the dying themselves, brought into churches because families don't know what else to do. Some are looking for final comfort. Some are too weak to stay anywhere else. And some are simply left there because there's nowhere left to take them. It becomes less about healing and more about witnessing, being present in the last moments, trying to make sense of something that doesn't really make sense at all. For you, watching all of this adds another layer to everything happening around you. It's not just illness anymore, not just fear or confusion. It's a whole system of belief forming in real time, trying to explain something that refuses to be explained. You see people shifting from one kind of certainty to another, from medicine to faith, from science they don't understand to religion they hope will understand them. And the more it spreads, the more intense it becomes. The line between comfort and desperation starts to blur. What begins as prayer turns into pleading. What begins as ritual turns into something more extreme. And what begins as hope slowly becomes a last attempt to feel some kind of control in a world that feels like it's slipping away completely. In the end, religion doesn't stop the plague, but it changes how people face it. It gives them something to do when there's nothing left to fix, something to believe in when everything else has failed. And in a time like this, even that is enough for many people to hold on, even if only for a little while longer. At this point, everything that once held the city together starts to quietly fall apart, not in one dramatic moment, but in small absences that slowly turn into something much bigger. It begins with work, or more accurately, the lack of it. People stop showing up, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. Some are sick, some are afraid, and some are already gone. The people who used to keep everything running, the workers, the traders, the builders, the ones who made the city function day to day, they're just not there anymore. At first, it's excused. A few missing workers here, and there doesn't seem like the end of the world. Maybe they'll come back tomorrow, maybe next week. But tomorrow turns into a pattern, and the pattern turns into a problem no one can ignore. Shops open late, or not at all. Projects are abandoned halfway through. Basic services start breaking down because there simply aren't enough people left to maintain them. The city doesn't collapse loudly. It just stops working properly, piece by piece. Then food starts becoming a real issue. Not in a distant, theoretical way, but in a very immediate, uncomfortable way. Markets that used to be full begin to empty out. Not because food doesn't exist anymore, but because it's not getting where it needs to go. Fewer workers means fewer deliveries, fewer farmers bringing goods in, fewer hands to move everything through the system. What used to be normal supply suddenly becomes unpredictable. People notice it fast. Stalls that used to have plenty now have very little. Prices start rising, not slowly, but sharply, because everyone is trying to secure what they can while they still can. You see people arguing over basic items that were once considered ordinary. Bread, grain, water, anything that can keep someone going for another day. And behind all of it is the same feeling, quiet panic building under the surface. As supplies shrink, behavior changes. People who would normally wait their turn start pushing forward. Those who have more begin to guard it more closely. Sharing becomes less common, not because people suddenly became selfish, but because survival starts to feel uncertain. When you don't know if there will be more tomorrow, you stop thinking about anyone else. And then there's the silence that begins to appear in places that were never silent before. You start seeing homes that don't have movement anymore. Doors stay closed for too long. Windows remain dark even during the day. At first, people avoid thinking about it, but eventually it becomes impossible not to notice. Some of these homes have sick people inside who never recovered. Others have families who all fell at once, one after another, with no one left to respond or care for them. Bodies begin to appear in the streets more often. At first, it's shocking every time it happens, people stopping, staring, unsure of what to do. But as time passes, that reaction changes. There are simply too many sick, too many dying, too many moments where no one is around to help or even notice in time. The normal systems that would handle death, the burial, the rituals, the care, they can't keep up anymore. So the bodies remain where they fall for longer periods of time. Not because people don't care, but because there's no capacity left to respond quickly. The fear of infection also grows, making people even more reluctant to get close. What was once unthinkable slowly becomes part of the environment, something people have to walk past, something they try not to look at too long. Entire households begin disappearing from daily life. Not physically at first, but socially. No movement, no sound, no signs of activity. And then eventually, confirmation arrives in the form of stories, rumors, or direct observation that everyone inside has been affected. One person gets sick, then another, until there's no one left to care for the rest. It doesn't happen in dramatic bursts. It happens quietly, which somehow makes it worse. You start to realize that sickness is no longer something isolated to individuals. It moves through entire groups, entire homes, entire sections of the city. Once it enters a space, it doesn't just affect one person and stop. It spreads through the people closest to each other, taking advantage of proximity, time, and routine. Families, which once felt like safety, become vulnerable in ways no one expected. The emotional weight of this begins to shift everything. People don't just fear getting sick anymore. They fear what happens after. Who will be left? Who will survive? And what will be left of their lives if everyone around them is gone? That kind of thinking changes how people move, how they interact, how they survive day to day. The city itself starts to feel emptier, even when people are still technically there. Less movement in the streets, fewer conversations, fewer reasons to gather. The energy that once made it feel alive is fading, replaced by something quieter and more uncertain. It's not fully dead, but it's not alive in the way it used to be either. And through all of this, the disease continues to move, not quickly in a visible sense, but steadily, like it doesn't need urgency, because time itself is working in its favor. Every day adds more pressure, more loss, more absence. The structures that once supported normal life, work, trade, family, community, all of them are weakening at the same time. You begin to understand something uncomfortable as you move through it. This isn't just a medical crisis, and it isn't just fear spreading through a population. It's a full breakdown of how life used to function. Everything depends on people being present, healthy, and connected. When that stops, everything else stops too. And now you're standing in the middle of it, watching a city slowly lose its ability to hold itself together, not in one dramatic collapse, but in thousands of small disappearances that add up to something irreversible. At this stage, the panic has reached a point where people start trying anything that might slow things down, even if it feels too late. The idea of quarantine appears again and again, not as a fully planned system, but as a desperate reaction. People are no longer just reacting to sickness. They're reacting to fear itself, trying to create distance between themselves and anything that might carry what's spreading through the city. It starts small, with a few houses being marked or avoided, places where sickness is known to exist. Then it becomes more organized, or at least it tries to. Certain streets are blocked off, movement is restricted, and people are told not to travel between areas unless absolutely necessary. The intention is clear: contain it, slow it, stop it from moving further. But in reality, it's already everywhere, which makes the effort feel more like damage control than prevention. Then the bigger measures begin. City gates are locked or heavily guarded, and entry or exit becomes controlled in ways that didn't exist before. People who once moved freely between towns and regions suddenly find themselves stuck, either trapped inside with the sickness or locked out and afraid of what they've left behind. Trade slows to almost nothing. Travel becomes dangerous or outright forbidden, and entire regions begin isolating themselves from each other in hopes of survival. Inside the city, infected homes are treated differently now. Once someone is identified as sick, their house may be sealed off, sometimes with people still inside. Doors are marked or physically blocked, and others are warned to stay away. It's a harsh solution, but in the minds of those making decisions, it's the only way to prevent further spread. Still, it creates a heavy feeling across the city, because everyone knows what it means when a door is closed like that. It's not just containment. It's abandonment in its most final form. You start seeing these sealed homes more often, and each one adds another layer of unease to everything else happening around you. Walking past them feels different, like you're passing something you're not supposed to look at directly. Sometimes you hear movement inside, sometimes nothing at all, and both are equally unsettling. People quicken their pace when they go near these places, avoiding eye contact, pretending they don't exist. But even with all these attempts, quarantine doesn't feel like it's truly working. The sickness is already too widespread, too embedded in daily life to be contained by simple boundaries. You can lock doors, you can close gates, but you can't undo the fact that people have already been moving through the city for weeks while infected, unknowingly carrying it with them everywhere they go. What actually changes most isn't the spread of the disease, but the behavior of the people. Fear becomes constant. It's no longer something that comes and goes. It's always there in the background, shaping every decision. Every interaction with another person now carries risk. A simple conversation, a shared space, even being in the same street starts to feel uncertain. People begin to avoid each other more aggressively. Where before there was hesitation, now there is distance. You notice how quickly people step away when someone gets too close, how conversations end faster than they used to, how everyone seems to be calculating risk without saying a word. The idea of another person stops being neutral and starts feeling dangerous. Trust breaks down further with every passing day. Even people who know each other well begin to question safety. Friends, neighbors, even family members start to view each other differently. Not because their relationships have changed emotionally, but because survival changes perspective. Anyone could be carrying it. Anyone could be the reason you get sick next. And that uncertainty changes everything. The city doesn't just become isolated from the outside world. It becomes isolated within itself. People are physically closer than ever in some places, but emotionally and socially further apart than they've ever been. Even the attempts to control movement add to the tension. Every restriction, every locked gate, every sealed home is a constant reminder that things are getting worse, not better. Instead of making people feel safer, it reinforces the idea that danger is everywhere and growing. You start to realize that quarantine, while logical on paper, can't fix something that is already this widespread. It slows things down at best, but it doesn't reverse what has already happened. The damage is already inside the system, already moving through the population, already shaping how people live and think. And so the city enters a strange state, not fully open, not fully closed, but trapped somewhere in between. Movement is restricted, fear is constant, and every person is forced to navigate a world where simply being near someone else has become a risk. At this point, the illness stops feeling like something you might survive and starts feeling like something you're just moving through. It doesn't drag out over weeks the way people once hoped it would. It moves fast, almost brutally fast. One day you're still standing, still talking, still trying to convince yourself it might pass. And within a couple of days, everything changes. The symptoms that were already bad suddenly escalate. The fever spikes higher than before, not just warmth in the body anymore, but a burning heat that doesn't go away no matter what you do. Your skin feels like it doesn't belong to you, sensitive, uncomfortable, almost irritated by its own existence. Sleep becomes impossible, not because you're awake, but because your body won't let you rest properly even when exhaustion takes over. Then come the visible signs, the ones that remove any remaining doubt. Dark spots begin to appear on the skin, small at first, almost easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But they don't stay small. They spread. They deepen in color. They become impossible to ignore. It's the kind of change that makes you stare at your own hands or arms for longer than you want to, trying to convince yourself it's something else, something harmless, even though you already know it isn't. The pain gets worse alongside it. Not just discomfort anymore, but something deeper and more overwhelming, like your entire body is reacting at once, and there's no part of you that feels unaffected. It's hard to focus on anything else because the pain doesn't stay in one place. It moves, it shifts, it builds until it feels like it's everywhere at the same time. Even simple movements become exhausting, like your body is resisting you every step of the way. And then there's the vomiting, which doesn't feel like a separate symptom, but part of the overall collapse. Your body rejecting itself, unable to keep anything down, unable to stabilize. It leaves you weaker each time, but there's no stopping it, no controlling it. It just happens, over and over, until even standing feels uncertain. Alongside that comes something even more unsettling, delirium. Moments where things don't feel real anymore, where thoughts don't connect properly, where time feels distorted. You might find yourself forgetting where you are for brief moments, or struggling to separate what's happening now from what you remember earlier. It's disorienting in a way that makes everything worse, because you can't even fully trust your own mind to stay steady. People around you, if there are still people around you, start to feel distant, like they're part of something you can't quite reach anymore. Conversations become difficult to follow. Sounds feel too loud or too far away at the same time. Reality itself starts to feel unstable, like it's slipping just slightly out of alignment. And through all of this, the worst understanding begins to settle in quietly. There's no recovery stage that feels real anymore. No gradual improvement. No turning point where things suddenly get better. Instead, everything points in one direction, downwards. Death stops being something distant or hypothetical. It becomes the expected outcome, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, unavoidable way that everyone starts to understand without needing it explained. When symptoms reach this stage, There isn't much discussion anymore about survival. It becomes about time, not outcome. People stop speaking in hopeful terms. Even those trying to help begin to adjust their language, because pretending there's a cure or a reversal doesn't match reality anymore. The focus shifts from saving to managing, from recovery to comfort, from fighting to waiting. You start to see it in how people behave. Movements slow down, conversations shorten, energy fades from interactions. There's less resistance, not because people have given up emotionally, but because their bodies are no longer giving them the option to keep fighting in the same way. And what makes it even more devastating is how quickly it happens. There's no long farewell for most. No extended decline over months or years. Just days, sometimes less. A rapid collapse from illness into something far more final than anyone was prepared for. At this stage, it becomes clear that this isn't just a severe sickness moving through a population. It's something that overwhelms every system the body has, one after another, until there's nothing left to hold on to. And once it reaches this point, the idea of control, of treatment, of normal outcomes, all of it starts to disappear completely. What's left is a city full of people who now understand, in the most direct way possible, that this is no longer something they can simply survive through with time or luck. It has become something far more absolute and far more final than anyone ever expected when it first began. At this point, death stops feeling like something distant or abstract and starts feeling immediate, almost routine, which is the most unsettling part of all of it. It doesn't come after long struggles anymore, or after drawn-out illness that people can prepare for. It comes fast, faster than anyone expects. One moment someone is still talking, still moving, still trying to get through the day, and within just a few days, sometimes even less, they're gone. Most people don't even get the chance to process what's happening to them. There's no long period of warning, no slow decline where goodbyes can be said properly, no time for people to gather and make sense of it together. It just happens quickly and repeatedly until the idea of soon starts to mean something very different. Soon doesn't feel like days or weeks anymore. It feels like hours, sometimes moments. And because everything is happening so fast, goodbyes start disappearing from daily life. Not because people don't care, but because there simply isn't time for them anymore. Someone gets sick, and within a very short period, they're already too weak to talk properly. Conversations become short, broken, incomplete. Words that would normally carry meaning now get cut off halfway, replaced by silence or exhaustion. People stop expecting closure because closure requires time, and time is no longer something the city has. Families try to stay together, but even that becomes difficult to maintain. One person falls ill, then another, and suddenly the focus shifts from comfort to survival, from staying close to try not to fall next. The idea of sitting by someone's side until the end becomes less realistic as the number of people affected grows and the speed of decline increases. Even love and loyalty start getting tested by something as simple and brutal as time running out. As deaths increase, the way society handles them begins to break down completely. Funerals, which once gave structure and meaning to loss, can no longer happen the way they used to. There are too many bodies, too many families, too much happening at once. Traditional rituals take time, space, and organization, and none of those things are available anymore. So they begin to disappear, replaced by faster, more practical solutions that feel emotionally empty but necessary for survival. Mass graves become the new reality in many places, not as a choice people feel good about, but as a response to overwhelming numbers. There is no longer the ability to treat each death individually in the way people once did. Bodies are collected together because there is no alternative that matches the scale of what is happening. It's efficient in the most painful way possible, reducing something deeply personal into something logistical. Watching this shift is disturbing because it changes how death itself feels. It is no longer rare or shocking in the same way it once was. It becomes something people expect to encounter daily. The emotional weight of it doesn't disappear, but becomes compressed, like there is no space left in people's minds to process each loss fully before the next one happens. One tragedy overlaps with another until they blur together. You start to notice how people react differently over time. At first, every death is met with shock, grief, disbelief. But as it continues, those reactions start to fade, not because people care less, but because they are overwhelmed. There is no time to fully process one loss before another appears, and the mind begins to adjust in ways that feel unnatural. Silence replaces reaction. Movement becomes mechanical. Survival becomes the only focus. Even those who are still healthy begin to change their behavior. There is a sense that anyone could be next, that no one is truly safe, and that changes how people interact with everything around them. You see fewer emotional reactions, fewer long conversations, fewer moments of pause. Everything becomes quicker, more practical, more focused on immediate needs rather than emotional processing. And through all of this, the most haunting part is how normal it starts to feel. Not acceptable, not easy, but familiar. The mind adapts to repetition in ways that are hard to control, and when death becomes constant, it loses some of its shock value simply because there is no space left for shock to exist. That doesn't mean people stop feeling it. It just means they stop being able to react to it the way they once did. The scale of it also changes perception. When a few people die, it feels like a tragedy. When many people die, it feels like a disaster. But when it happens continuously, everywhere, all the time, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a background reality that people are forced to live inside of, rather than something they can step away from and process. And that's what makes this stage so difficult to describe or even fully understand while living through it. It isn't just about individual loss anymore. It's about the sheer volume of it, the speed of it, and the way it strips away all the normal structures that give death meaning. There is no space for mourning in the traditional sense, no time for reflection, no pause between one loss and the next. Everything becomes compressed into survival and continuation, while death becomes something constant enough that it stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like part of the environment itself. And once that happens, the city is no longer just dealing with a plague. It is living inside a reality where death is no longer rare, no longer slow, and no longer personal in the way it once was. At this point, it's not just the body that's breaking down anymore, it's the mind. After everything people have seen, everything they've lost, something starts to shift inside them. Hope, which used to be the thing that kept everyone moving forward, slowly stops feeling real. Not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet way, like it just runs out without anyone noticing exactly when it happened. You start to see it in how people talk, or more importantly, how they don't talk. Conversations become shorter, emptier, like there's no point in saying much anymore. Questions about the future stop coming up because no one has answers worth giving. Even survival stops feeling like something you're working toward and starts feeling like something you're just stuck inside. For some people, that loss of hope turns into anger instead. Not planned, not controlled, just something that builds up and comes out in the worst ways. You start seeing more violence in the streets, more fights breaking out over small things that normally wouldn't matter. A piece of food, a space to sleep, a misunderstanding that escalates too quickly. Under normal circumstances, people would step back, calm down, talk it out. But normal doesn't really exist anymore. It's not just violence either. It's theft, desperation, people doing things they would never have considered before. When survival feels uncertain, rules start to feel optional. Morals don't disappear all at once. They just stop feeling strong enough to guide decisions. You can see it happening in real time. People crossing lines they used to believe were unthinkable, just because the situation has pushed them past their limits. At the same time, another reaction starts to appear, almost the opposite of violence. Some people don't fight back at all. They just withdraw completely. They isolate themselves, shut themselves away from everything, not just physically, but mentally too. They stop engaging, stop participating, stop reacting to what's happening around them. It's like they decide the safest place to be is as far away from everything as possible, even if that means disappearing into themselves. You see homes that stay closed for days, then weeks, with no movement inside. People who once walked the streets now avoid them entirely, not because they are physically unable, but because they can't handle being part of the world outside anymore. It becomes easier to stay still than to keep facing what's happening outside the walls. And in between those two extremes, violence and isolation, there's a growing emptiness that spreads through everyone else. A kind of emotional exhaustion that makes it harder to care, harder to react, harder to keep holding on to anything that used to matter. People still move, still talk, still survive, but there's a noticeable difference in how they do it. Everything feels reduced, like they're operating on whatever is left instead of what they used to have. The moral structure of society, the invisible set of rules that used to guide behavior, starts to erode in the background. Not because people suddenly decide to abandon it, but because it stops being reinforced. When enough people are suffering, when enough systems are failing, those shared expectations of right and wrong begin to weaken. It becomes harder to justify following rules when it feels like the rules are no longer protecting anyone. You can see it in small decisions at first. Someone taking more than their share. Someone ignoring someone else in need. Someone choosing their own survival over helping another person. Individually, these moments might not seem huge, but together they form a pattern. A slow shift in how people see each other, not as a community, but as competition for limited safety and resources. Even empathy starts to feel strained. Not gone, but harder to access. When every day brings new loss, new fear, new uncertainty, people begin to conserve their emotional energy without realizing it. They can't afford to feel everything all the time, so they start feeling less, or at least expressing less. And that's when the breakdown becomes more visible, not just in actions, but in atmosphere. The city feels different now, heavier, colder in a way that isn't about temperature. There's less trust in the air, less patience, less willingness to assume the best in others. Every interaction carries a subtle edge of caution, like everyone is waiting for something else to go wrong. What's most unsettling is that this isn't caused by one single event, but by everything happening all at once for too long. The sickness, the death, the fear, the uncertainty, it all adds up until people simply can't hold themselves together in the same way anymore. And so society doesn't collapse in one dramatic moment here either. It unravels, slowly, quietly, inside people first, and only then in the world around them. By the time things begin to settle, if you can even call it that, the world that's left behind doesn't feel like the one people remember. It's quieter, but not peaceful. It's empty, but not calm. The survivors who remain are left in a strange version of their old lives, where everything is still technically there. The buildings, the roads, the homes, but almost none of the people who gave those places meaning. You walk through towns that once felt crowded and alive, and now every sound feels too loud. Footsteps echo in ways they never used to. Doors that once opened constantly now stay shut for days at a time. Markets, streets, and public spaces that were once full of movement are now barely used, like the city is waiting for something that isn't coming back. Even the air feels different, not because it physically changed, but because there's no longer enough life moving through it. The survivors who remain don't feel like they've simply returned to normal. That idea doesn't really exist anymore. Instead, they carry everything that happened with them. Trauma isn't something that fades quickly in a situation like this. It lingers in every quiet moment, in every empty street, in every reminder of who isn't there anymore. People don't talk about it much, not because they've forgotten, but because talking about it feels heavier than silence. You see it in their behavior. Some people avoid certain streets entirely because of memories attached to them. Others stop going to places they used to visit daily, not because they can't, but because it feels wrong now. Even simple things like passing by a home that used to belong to someone they knew can bring everything rushing back. Grief becomes less of a moment and more of a constant background feeling. Sleep becomes complicated for many survivors, not because the physical danger is still there, but because the mind doesn't fully shut off anymore. Memories replay, thoughts drift back to things that happened during the worst moments, and even rest doesn't always feel like rest. For some, silence itself becomes uncomfortable, because silence now carries too much meaning. At the same time, the structure of society begins to shift in ways that no one really planned for. With so many people gone, there simply aren't enough workers left to maintain things the way they used to be. Entire systems that relied on large numbers of people functioning together start to break down or reorganize. Jobs that were once ordinary suddenly become essential simply because there is no one else to do them. This creates a strange shift in social power. People who survived with certain skills, or who are physically able to work, suddenly become far more important than they ever were before. It's not about status in the old sense anymore. It's about necessity. Those who can rebuild, repair, produce, or organize resources naturally take on larger roles, not always by choice, but because the situation demands it. In some places, this shift is smooth. People cooperate because they have no other option. In others, it creates tension because the balance that used to exist in society is gone. The old hierarchies don't fully apply anymore, but new ones haven't fully formed yet either. It's a transition period where everything feels unstable, even if there's no active crisis happening at that exact moment. Food production, trade, and basic services slowly restart in some areas, but nothing returns to the scale it once was. Everything is smaller now, more limited, more cautious. People don't assume stability anymore, so they build things in ways that can survive uncertainty. Redundancy becomes more important than efficiency. Safety becomes more important than speed. Even trust between people changes. After everything that happened, it takes longer to rely on others again. Survivors don't easily forget how quickly things fell apart, or how unpredictable human behavior became during the worst of it. So even when cooperation returns, it comes with hesitation, with caution, with memory. New communities begin to form, but they're shaped by what came before. There's an awareness that things can collapse again if people aren't careful. So there's more attention on structure, on planning, on control. At the same time, there's also a quiet understanding that nothing will ever return to how it was. That version of the world is gone. Children born after or during the later stages of the crisis grow up in a completely different reality. They don't fully remember what was lost, but they grow up surrounded by the absence of it. Stories become the main way the past is understood, and even those stories struggle to fully capture what life used to feel like before everything changed. For those who lived through it, there's a permanent sense of before and after. Life is divided into two parts that can never really be connected again in a normal way. The world before the plague feels almost unreal in hindsight, like something distant and fragile. The world after feels more practical, more cautious, more aware of how quickly things can fall apart. And even as time moves forward, that awareness never really disappears. It shapes how people build, how they live, how they think about the future. Everything carries the memory of what happened, even when it's not spoken about directly. Because after something like this, survival is no longer just about staying alive in the moment. It becomes about learning how to live in a world that has already proven it can change completely and without warning in the worst possible way. By this stage, it's no longer just a local disaster. It's something much bigger, something moving quietly but relentlessly across entire regions. The sickness doesn't stay in one place. It follows people, and people follow trade. That's what makes it so unstoppable. Every road, every port, every connection between towns and cities becomes a path for it to travel. It starts along trade routes, the same ones that normally bring wealth, goods, and news from distant places. Merchants move from city to city, ships travel between ports, caravans cross long stretches of land, and without anyone realizing it, the disease moves with them. No one sees it happening in real time. There's no warning sign, no obvious moment where it spreads. It just arrives in one place, then another, then another. At first, cities think they're dealing with their own isolated problem. One town gets sick, then another far away, and people don't immediately connect the two. It feels separate, like unrelated outbreaks. But as time passes, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Reports come in from different regions, all describing the same kind of illness, the same rapid decline, the same overwhelming fear. Major cities begin to fall one by one. Places that were once centers of power, trade, and culture start experiencing the same collapse seen earlier in smaller towns. The difference now is scale. Everything is larger, more populated, more connected, so when it hits, the impact is even heavier. Streets that were once full of life become empty in a matter of weeks. Markets shut down. Public spaces clear out. Entire sections of cities fall silent. There's a kind of chain reaction to it. One region suffers, which disrupts trade, which affects another region, which weakens its ability to respond, and so on. Everything is linked, and that connection, which once made life easier and more prosperous, now becomes the reason the disease spread so effectively. The same systems that helped civilization grow are now carrying its collapse across distances. Millions begin to die across the continent. The numbers are too large for anyone to fully comprehend in a personal way. It stops being about individuals in public conversation and becomes statistics, estimates, reports that still don't capture the emotional reality of what's happening. But behind those numbers are countless personal stories that never get fully told. Entire families, communities, and generations affected at once. No region is truly safe, and that realization spreads even faster than the disease itself. At first, people think distance might protect them, that if they are far enough away from the original outbreak, they will be fine. But that belief doesn't last long. Every new report proves otherwise. Every city that thought it was untouched eventually finds itself facing the same reality. As fear spreads across borders, movement becomes more restricted, but by then it's already too late. The disease has already moved ahead of the response, already established itself in multiple places at once. Isolation stops being a solution and starts becoming a delayed reaction to something that has already happened. Communication between regions becomes strained. Messages take longer, information is incomplete, and by the time news arrives, it's often already outdated. What people hear about a city is no longer its current state, but what was weeks earlier. That delay creates confusion, and confusion leads to poor decisions, which only makes the situation worse. Trade, which once connected the entire continent, slows down dramatically, not just because of fear, but because there are fewer people to carry it out. Ships don't sail as often, caravans are reduced, and entire routes fall into disuse. The flow of goods that once kept societies stable begins to break apart, leaving some places without essential supplies. And yet, despite all attempts to contain it, the spread continues. It doesn't respect borders. alliances, or distance. It moves wherever people move, and as long as human connection exists, it finds a way to follow it. That realization changes everything about how people think of safety. It's no longer about where you are, but about whether you've already been exposed. Cities that once considered themselves powerful or protected are forced to confront the same vulnerability as smaller towns. Wealth, strength, and status offer no real protection. The disease ignores those distinctions completely. It moves through populations without preference, affecting everyone in its path. As more regions fall, a sense of inevitability begins to take hold. It's no longer a question of if a place will be affected, but when. That shift in thinking is powerful because it removes the illusion of control that people desperately cling to. Once that illusion is gone, everything else becomes harder to maintain. Across Europe, the landscape of daily life changes dramatically. What was once a connected network of thriving cities becomes a patchwork of struggling, isolated communities, each dealing with its own version of the same crisis. The sense of unity that trade and travel once created is replaced by fragmentation and uncertainty. And through it all, the disease continues its path, not rushing, not slowing, simply moving wherever people move, expanding not through force, but through connection itself. And that is what makes it impossible to fully stop once it has reached this stage, because the very thing that defines human civilization is also what allows it to spread. At this point, it's not just about history anymore. It becomes personal. Because if you were actually dropped into this world, into this exact moment in time, the reality is simple. You probably wouldn't make it very far. Not because of anything dramatic or heroic, but because everything about this environment works against you in ways you wouldn't even notice at first. The first major issue is something you can't see at all: immunity. Your body has absolutely no experience with this kind of bacteria. Today, your immune system is shaped by modern environments, modern medicine, and decades of scientific understanding that protect you from things people back then had no idea even existed. But here, none of that helps you. You're just another human body encountering something completely unfamiliar, and that usually doesn't end well. Then there's sanitation, or more accurately, the lack of it. Clean water, proper waste disposal, hygiene practices that you take for granted, none of that really exists in the same way. People live close together, streets are crowded, animals move freely through living areas, and waste management is basic at best. Even simple things like washing hands or having clean drinking water aren't standard. That alone makes illness spread much faster than anything you're used to dealing with. On top of that, there's no real understanding of what's actually happening. Modern medicine doesn't exist here, and even basic knowledge about how disease spreads isn't known. People rely on guesses, traditions, and theories that sound logical to them, but don't actually match reality. So instead of effective treatment, you get things like bloodletting, herbal mixtures, and spiritual explanations. None of it targets the real cause, because the real cause isn't understood. So if you got sick, you wouldn't just be dealing with the illness itself. You'd also be dealing with ineffective or even harmful treatments. And without proper medical support, something that might be survivable today becomes far more dangerous. There's no antibiotics, no sterile hospitals, no emergency care in the way we understand it now. You're essentially on your own, or relying on people who are also guessing. And then there's the most immediate risk of all: proximity. You wouldn't be living in isolation. You'd be surrounded by people, constantly. Crowded homes, busy streets, shared spaces, close contact with others every single day. Once something contagious enters that kind of environment, it doesn't need much time to move from person to person. You might try to avoid sick people, but the problem is that in this stage of history, you often can't even tell who is sick at first. Symptoms take time to show, and by the time they do, transmission may have already happened. That delay is what makes it so effective. You're exposed before you even realize there's anything to avoid. Even your normal behavior would work against you. The way you interact, the way you move through spaces, the way you assume safety in everyday environments. All of that is based on modern expectations that don't apply here. Something as simple as sharing space indoors, touching objects others have handled, or walking through crowded areas becomes a risk you wouldn't normally think twice about. And mentally, that matters too, because in this kind of environment, fear spreads just as fast as disease. People panic, they make decisions quickly, they don't always act rationally. That kind of chaos increases exposure, not reduces it. The more people try to escape danger without understanding it, the more they unintentionally spread it further. So when you put it all together, it's not just one thing that makes survival unlikely, it's everything at once. No immunity, poor hygiene, lack of knowledge, and constant exposure to other people in the same situation. Each factor on its own is a problem, but combined, they create an environment where staying safe becomes incredibly difficult. And that's the uncomfortable truth of it. It's not that you're weak, or incapable, or unprepared in a personal sense. It's that you're being dropped into a world that simply isn't built for the kind of understanding and protection you're used to. A world where the basic tools that keep you safe today don't exist yet. So surviving isn't impossible, but it's not something you can rely on knowledge alone for. In this environment, survival often comes down to timing, luck, and circumstances you have very little control over. And that's what makes it so clear why most people, even you, wouldn't last very long in it. By the time it's all over, there's no real sense of closure, because nothing about it feels like a finished story. It feels more like a scar left across an entire continent, something that changed everything, and then slowly faded into something people tried to rebuild around. The numbers alone are almost impossible to fully understand. Up to half of Europe gone. Not in one place, not in one moment, but across towns, cities, and regions, until almost no one was untouched by it in some way. Life after that doesn't immediately bounce back. In fact, it changes completely. Life expectancy drops so sharply that even the idea of long-term planning starts to feel different. People don't assume they'll grow old the way they once did. They don't assume stability will last for decades. Everything becomes more immediate, more focused on the present, because the future has already proven how uncertain it can be. And when you look back at it, one of the most striking things is how unprepared everyone was. Not because people didn't care, and not because they didn't try, but because they simply didn't have the knowledge or tools to understand what they were facing. There was no clear explanation at the time, no scientific framework, no understanding of how disease actually spread in a way that could be controlled. So every response was based on guesses, beliefs, and limited experience. Some people turned to medicine that didn't work. Some turned to religion for answers. Some tried isolation, others tried movement, and many just tried to survive day by day without any real strategy at all. But none of it was coordinated in a way that could fully stop what was happening, because the root cause itself wasn't understood. It wasn't just a failure of effort, it was a failure of knowledge. That's what makes the whole thing feel so overwhelming in hindsight. Not just the scale of death, but the fact that almost every decision made during it was made without full understanding of what was actually going on. People were reacting to something they couldn't see, couldn't measure, and couldn't properly explain. And that lack of clarity shaped everything that followed. In the end, survival often didn't come down to intelligence or strength or status. It came down to circumstances, where you were, who you were near, what moment you happened to be in when exposure happened. Some people survived without fully understanding why. Others did everything they could and still didn't make it. That randomness is one of the most unsettling parts of the entire event, because it removes the idea of control. It shows that even in a structured society, even with systems and beliefs and attempts to manage crisis, there are moments in history where outcomes are not evenly distributed or fairly earned. They're just what happened. And that's the final reflection that stays with it. Not just that the Black Death was devastating, but that it exposed how fragile everything really was. How quickly systems can fail when they meet something they don't understand. How easily normal life can disappear. And how little power individuals actually have when something like that moves through a population. Looking back, it becomes less about a single event and more about a reminder. A reminder that civilization, for all its structure and confidence, can still be deeply vulnerable. And that survival, in the end, is not always something you can plan for. Sometimes, it's just something that happens to you, or doesn't.